I never thought I'd catch feelings for my stepdad. It still sounds insane, even as I'm saying it, but that's what happened. And it all started during a weekend I thought would be uneventful. I'm Tyler. I was 22 that summer, just finished my second year of college, and it was hot, like brutally hot. Campus was emptying out, and I figured I'd head home for a few days. Do some laundry, eat real food, sleep in a real bed. My parents divorced when I was 12, and a couple of years ago, my mom remarried. Her new husband, Mark, was one of those solid, quiet types. The kind of guy who doesn't say much, but always seems to have things under control. He wasn't flashy or loud, just calm, grounded, and kind of intimidating without trying to be. When I got home, Mom dropped a surprise on me. She had to leave for a work trip. "You don't mind being here alone with Mark, do you?" she asked, pulling her suitcase to the door. "Of course not," I said. "It's fine." And it was. Mark and I weren't exactly close, but we'd always gotten along. He wasn't overbearing, and I didn't have any weird teenage grudge against him. We'd talk in passing, maybe eat dinner together now and then. Civil, easy. That was it. That first night, Mark made dinner. He cooked this cheesy pasta thing and opened a bottle of wine. We ended up sitting on the couch, eating and watching an old action movie he liked. He had on a loose gray tank top and basketball shorts, barefoot, relaxed. I remember thinking he looked different than I remembered, like really fit for a guy pushing 40. "You've grown up," he said halfway through the movie, just casually, while sipping his wine. I looked over. "Yeah? You seem older, carry yourself different, not a kid anymore." I nodded, a little awkward. It wasn't what he said, it was how he said it. Like he was seeing me differently. Or maybe I was imagining it. But that night, I couldn't stop thinking about him. The way his voice sounded when he said those words. How his eyes lingered a little longer than normal. I told myself I was reading into it. He was just being nice. Just a stepdad trying to make conversation. The next day was stupid hot, and he suggested we use the pool. I agreed. He changed into his swim trunks and walked outside before me. And yeah, I noticed. Broad shoulders, tan skin, light trail of hair across his chest. He looked like someone you'd see in a fitness ad, not a suburban dad. We swam around for a while, messed around in the water, and talked about nothing. Music, college, the usual. It was chill, but the way he looked at me felt new, different. I wasn't crazy. I started noticing the little things, like how his hand stayed on my shoulder a second longer when he helped me out of the water, or how he laughed at stuff I said that wasn't even that funny. That night, after my shower, I stepped out of the bathroom in just a towel and headed down the hall. The door to my room was cracked open, and I didn't realize Mark was walking past at that exact moment. We looked at each other, just a second or two. Nothing was said. He kept walking, like it was no big deal. But something about that moment stuck in my head. The way his eyes dropped, just for a split second. The way my stomach tightened. Something was changing. I didn't know what yet, but I knew it wasn't nothing. The next morning, Mark was already in the kitchen when I came downstairs. He was wearing that same tank top from the night before, except now it was slightly damp with sweat. The AC must have been slacking, or maybe he'd just come in from the yard. Either way, his skin had that sun-warmed glow, and I tried not to stare as I grabbed a mug and poured myself some coffee. "Sleep okay?" he asked, his voice low, a little raspy. "Yeah," I said, even though I'd been tossing all night, my mind replaying that weird little hallway moment on a loop. We sat at the table in silence for a few minutes, sipping coffee. It wasn't awkward exactly, but it wasn't comfortable either. There was something in the air. Not tension, exactly, but awareness. Like we were both too conscious of each other, trying too hard not to act like we were. Mark finally cleared his throat. "I was thinking about grilling later. Burgers. Sound good?" "Yeah, sounds great," I replied, maybe a little too fast. He smirked a little, then went back to scrolling his phone. I tried to focus on mine, but I kept catching him in my peripheral vision. His forearm flexing as he picked up his mug, the way his shoulders stretched beneath the fabric when he leaned back in the chair. By the afternoon, the heat was unbearable again, and I ended up shirtless on the deck, scrolling aimlessly through Instagram while Mark got the grill going. Every time he reached for a spatula or turned a burger, I'd glance up without meaning to. He caught me once, just a quick look, and didn't say anything. Just kind of half smiled to himself and went back to what he was doing. Dinner was quiet but good. Afterward, we sat on the deck as the sun went down, sipping beers and listening to the neighborhood slowly wind down. The air was thick with humidity and mosquitoes. I was buzzed just enough to feel loose, and so was he. I forgot how peaceful it is out here, I said, stretching out my legs. Mark nodded. Yeah, one of the reasons I bought this house. Nights like this, it just feels good to breathe. I turned to look at him. Do you miss being alone? He raised an eyebrow, like the question caught him off guard. You mean before I married your mom? Yeah. He paused for a second. Sometimes. Not in a bad way. I just like the quiet. The space. I nodded, thinking about how different that was from my life at school. Noise, parties, crowded apartments. Everything, always moving. It's kind of nice being here like this, I said, then instantly wondered if that sounded weird. But Mark didn't flinch. He just glanced at me, his expression unreadable. Yeah, it is. We sat there until the sky turned purple and the cicadas got loud enough to drown out everything else. Eventually, he stood up, stretched, that full body kind of stretch where the shirt rides up and you catch a glimpse of skin and abs you weren't supposed to see, and said, I'm gonna shower. I nodded, swallowing hard. Cool. He disappeared inside, and I stayed out for a while, staring up at the stars and trying to shake whatever was spinning in my head. Later that night, I was brushing my teeth when he walked past the bathroom door. Shirtless, towel slung low around his waist, hair damp from the shower. I froze with my toothbrush in midair. He caught my eyes in the mirror, paused for half a beat, then kept walking down the hall. I don't know why that moment hit so hard. Maybe because it felt like he knew exactly what he was doing. Or maybe because I wanted him to. That night, I lay in bed wide awake, staring at the ceiling fan, replaying every second of the day. The looks, the quiet, the tension. And for the first time, I let the thought fully form. What if he felt it too? I barely slept. Every time I closed my eyes, my mind dragged me back to the sight of Mark walking down the hallway with nothing but that towel around his waist. The way his back looked, the way his body moved like he didn't even know how good he looked, or worse, like he did. By the time I gave up trying to sleep and rolled out of bed, it was already past 10. I threw on some shorts and a t-shirt and padded out to the kitchen. Mark was there, sipping coffee at the table, scrolling through his phone like it was any other morning. He was back in gym shorts and a fitted tee that clung to him in all the right places. Morning, he said without looking up. Morning. I grabbed a mug and poured myself some coffee, trying to act normal. It wasn't easy. The house was quieter than usual, the kind of quiet that made everything else seem louder. The clink of the spoon against the mug, the soft scrape of his foot shifting under the table, the low rumble of his voice when he finally broke the silence again. You heading back to campus soon? I shrugged. I've got a few more days. No rush. He nodded slowly. Good. It's been nice having you around. I wasn't sure how to respond to that, so I just nodded back, and we left it at that. Later that afternoon, I headed out to the garage to grab something from the storage shelf. I didn't even realize Mark was in there, shirtless, working on something by the workbench. His back was to me, and for a second, I just stood there, not in a creepy way, I swear. But there was something about seeing him like that again, in his space, comfortable, focused. The muscles in his back moved under his skin as he reached for a wrench or whatever he was doing. It was stupid how long I watched before clearing my throat. Hey, didn't know you were in here. He turned, wiped his hands on a rag, and smirked. You always sneak up on people? Only the ones who look like they belong in a fitness magazine. I hadn't meant to say that out loud. His eyes met mine. There was a pause. Then, instead of brushing it off, he said, You really think that? I froze. The air felt heavy all of a sudden. Charged? I nodded, not trusting my voice. He didn't say anything for a second. Just looked at me. Really looked at me. And then, like nothing had happened, he turned back to his project. That should have been the end of it. But it wasn't. That night, after dinner, he poured us each a whiskey. We sat in the living room. Lights dimmed, an old playlist humming low from the speaker. The whiskey hit faster than I expected, loosening my tongue and quieting the nervous hum that had been riding me for 2 straight days. I asked him about his past, stuff I never thought to ask before. He told me about the years before he met my mom, about his job, about some trip he took alone across the Southwest when he was younger. It was one of those rare conversations that felt like it could go anywhere. And then, somewhere between the second drink and the third, I asked the question that had been circling in my head since that first night. Do you ever think about things differently now that you're older? He looked at me, brow slightly furrowed. What do you mean? Like, the way you see people, feel about people. Has it changed? He studied me for a second, long enough to make my pulse tick up. Then he said, yeah, I think it has. He didn't ask why I brought it up. He didn't need to. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was full, heavy, full of possibility. I got up to take my glass to the sink. He followed a moment later. We ended up in the kitchen, side by side under the soft glow of the stove light. I turned to say something, I don't even remember what. But before I could speak, he reached out. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't some big, sweeping moment. He just touched my arm. Gently, his fingers resting against my skin, warm and slow. You sure you're okay here? He asked, his voice low. I am now, I said, and I didn't even know where that came from. He didn't move his hand, and I didn't move either. That moment stretched so long, I thought the tension might snap, but instead, he just gave my arm the slightest squeeze and let go. Then he stepped back, ran a hand through his hair like he was grounding himself and said, I'm gonna head up. Night, Tyler. I swallowed hard. Night, Mark. And that was it. But I stood there in the kitchen long after he was gone, heart thudding in my chest, skin buzzing where he'd touched me. Something had happened, even if neither of us said it out loud. The next morning, I was up earlier than usual. I hadn't slept much, again. My body was tired, but my mind wouldn't shut off. I kept thinking about the way Mark's hand felt on my arm, how long he'd let it stay there, how he'd looked at me after. Not like a stepdad, not like anything I could name, just something. He was already out back when I got downstairs, sitting in the shade, sipping coffee, reading the paper like it was 1995. He glanced up as I stepped outside and gave me a nod. Coffee's fresh, he said. Thanks. I poured myself a cup and joined him, sitting across the table. For a minute, we didn't talk. Just the breeze, the rustling leaves, the soft clink of his mug against the glass table. Then he set the paper down and looked at me. You okay? I met his eyes. Yeah. You've been quiet. So have you. He didn't deny it, just sat back in his chair, arms crossed, watching me. I keep thinking about the other night, I said quietly, when we were in the kitchen. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes shifted. I know, he said. There was another long pause, the kind that makes your skin itch and your heart race. Did you mean to touch me like that? I asked. He exhaled through his nose. I didn't plan to. That's not the same thing. He didn't answer right away, just leaned forward, elbows on the table, fingers laced together. Look, Tyler, I don't want to do anything that makes this weird between us. It's already weird, I said, but that doesn't mean it's bad. He looked at me like he didn't know what to say next, or like he knew exactly what he wanted to say, but couldn't risk saying it. Finally, he stood. I need to run to the hardware store, he said. Want to come? The change of subject was obvious, but I rolled with it. Sure. We drove with the windows down, wind blowing in, music low. Neither of us spoke the whole ride. It wasn't tense. It just felt like both of us were trying to figure out what the hell we were doing. At the store, he picked up a bunch of stuff for some backyard project he wanted to finish before Mom got home. A fence panel, some screws, a new drill bit. The usual. I mostly just followed him around, pushing the cart, stealing glances when I thought he wouldn't notice. He always noticed. Back at the house, he got to work while I grabbed a couple beers and handed him one without a word. We sat in the shade again, this time sweat sticking to our necks and the tops of our shirts. The humidity was brutal. Mark wiped his forehead with the hem of his shirt, giving me a flash of his stomach. "You always do your own repairs?" I asked, hoping to sound casual. "Most of the time," he said. "Cheaper, and I like the quiet." I nodded, then took a breath. "You're really different from anyone I've ever known." He looked over at me, curious. "Different how?" "Like solid. You don't say much, but when you do, I listen. You don't try too hard. You don't fake it." He stared at me for a moment. "That a compliment?" I nodded. "Yeah, it is." He looked away, but he was smiling. Later that night, after dinner, I was on the couch scrolling my phone when Mark walked in. He had changed into a pair of soft, faded lounge pants and a t-shirt that hugged his chest. He didn't say anything, just dropped onto the couch next to me. Not too close, not too far. We sat like that for a while, watching something dumb on Netflix, laughing sometimes, quiet other times. At one point, I felt him shift beside me. I glanced over. His knee was touching mine, just barely. I didn't move. Neither did he. The episode ended, and the room felt quiet except for the hum of the air conditioning. "I don't want to screw this up," he said suddenly, still not looking at me. "You haven't," I said. "You won't." He looked at me then, really looked at me. And in that moment, it felt like everything slowed down. I didn't plan it. I didn't think about it. I just leaned in, and so did he. Our lips met, soft, hesitant, almost like a question. When we pulled back, we just stared at each other, breathing heavy, neither of us saying anything. I think we both knew everything had changed, but neither of us said the words. We didn't need to. I don't know how long we sat there after the kiss. Neither of us moved. Neither of us spoke. The glow from the TV flickered across his face, soft and blue. And all I could think was, that actually just happened. He finally looked away, exhaled slowly, and stood. Not like he was storming off. More like he didn't trust himself to stay sitting next to me. "I'm gonna turn in," he said. Voice quiet, almost careful. "Yeah," I said, barely louder than a whisper. He hesitated for a second, eyes flicking to me, like he wanted to say something else. But he didn't. He just walked toward the stairs, and I listened as his footsteps faded down the hall. I sat there for a long time after he disappeared, staring at the dark screen, heart thudding in my chest. I wanted to replay the moment, the heat of his breath, the way his hand had instinctively brushed my leg right before our lips met. I wanted to hold on to that feeling, but I also couldn't ignore the knot of uncertainty that had formed in my stomach. What did it mean? What were we now? The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. Out of nerves, maybe? I wasn't sure what to expect. Would he act like it never happened? Would he be distant? Regretful? When I walked into the kitchen, he was already there. Coffee made. Dressed in a t-shirt and jeans. Calm, composed, just like always. "Morning," he said without looking up from his mug. "Hey," I replied. Voice dry. He finally looked at me. His face didn't give much away, but I saw something there. Tension maybe, or thoughtfulness. I poured myself some coffee and leaned against the counter, watching him. About a minute of silence passed before I said, "So, are we gonna talk about it?" Mark rubbed his jaw, stared down into his mug like it had answers. "I don't know what to say, Tyler." "Did it mean something to you?" He looked up, and this time his eyes didn't hide. "Yeah, it did." That answer should have made me feel better, but it didn't. "Okay," I said, my throat tight. "So what now?" He set his mug down, crossed his arms, leaned back against the table. "This isn't simple. You know that." "I'm not expecting it to be." He studied me for a long second. "It's not just the age difference, or the fact that I'm married to your mom. It's everything. This could blow up both our lives." "I know that," I said. "I'm not a kid, Mark." "I never said you were," he replied softly. I set my coffee down, walked over to the table, stood across from him. "I'm not asking for anything crazy. I just want honesty. Are you attracted to me? Or was that kiss just a moment?" He held my gaze for a long beat. "I'm attracted to you," he said. Quiet, serious, final. The words landed hard. In my chest, in my gut. It felt good to hear them, but it also made everything more real. He wasn't pretending. This wasn't just me reading too much into something. This was happening. And neither of us had a playbook for what came next. That afternoon, I stayed out of the house for a bit. Went for a walk, grabbed lunch at this little sandwich place I used to love, just to clear my head. When I came back, the house was quiet. Mark's truck was still in the driveway, but he wasn't downstairs. I figured he was upstairs in his room, or maybe in his office. I didn't go looking. Later that evening, I was sitting on the back steps when he came out. He had a beer in his hand, and he sat beside me like it was any other night. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded. "You?" He took a sip. "Trying to be." We didn't talk for a while. Just listened to the wind rustling through the trees and the occasional sound of a neighbor's dog barking down the block. Then he said, "You know, I keep thinking about what would have happened if I pulled away last night." I looked at him. "Do you wish you had?" He turned to meet my eyes. "No, that's the thing. I don't." My breath caught a little. I wasn't expecting him to be that honest. "I've been fighting this for a while," he said, convincing myself it was nothing. "Just a phase. You were under my roof. I'm supposed to look out for you. Not whatever this is." "But it's not nothing," I said, "right?" He shook his head. "No, it's not." And then, very slowly, like he was still trying to decide if it was a good idea, he reached out and placed his hand on mine. It wasn't bold. It wasn't forceful. Just steady, reassuring, real. And I let it stay there. We sat there for what felt like forever, his hand resting on mine. Quiet all around us. The sky was turning deep orange. That kind of dusk that only happens in summer, when the heat starts to break and the light gets soft and everything feels more honest somehow. It matched the moment too well. Mark didn't look at me, just stared out across the yard, his thumb slowly brushing the back of my hand. "You know this can't last, right?" he said eventually. "I know," I said, but I didn't move my hand. "And I don't want to lie to your mom, or keep living like something isn't happening when it is." "I'm not asking you to lie," I said. "I'm just asking you not to pretend this didn't mean anything." He finally turned to look at me, eyes steady, serious. It meant a lot. Too much, maybe. There was no drama in his voice. No panic, just the truth. He squeezed my hand once and let go. "I need to figure out what I'm doing. With all of this. You, her, me." He stood slowly, ran a hand through his hair. "I didn't expect this. I wasn't looking for it." "Neither was I said quietly. He nodded, like that made it worse, not better. "But it's here." I didn't try to stop him when he walked back inside. I stayed on the porch until the last of the light disappeared, until the air got cool enough that I started to shiver. I wasn't sad. Not really. Just full of something heavy and unfinished. That night, I didn't sleep. Again. I could hear him pacing upstairs, floorboards creaking just slightly above my room. We were both awake, both thinking. And then, sometime after midnight, I heard the knock. Soft, barely audible. I sat up, heart racing, and opened the door. It was him. He stood there, barefoot, in a plain black t-shirt and sweats. His eyes were tired but clear. "I can't stop thinking about you," he said, voice low. "I've tried. I've told myself 100 reasons why this is wrong, why it's messy, but it's not going away." I stepped back, wordless, and he walked in. We didn't say much after that. We didn't need to. The kiss that night was nothing like the one on the couch. It was slower, deeper, more certain. He touched my face like he was afraid it would be the last time. And I held on to him, like I didn't care what tomorrow looked like, only that tonight was real. We didn't go all the way. It wasn't about that. We lay in my bed, side by side, our legs tangled, his hand on my chest, my head on his shoulder. We whispered things we'd never admit to anyone else. Things about fear and timing, and how the people we're supposed to love aren't always the people we choose. When the sun started to rise, I turned to him and asked, "So what happens now?" He looked at me for a long time. I don't know, but he didn't leave. And that was enough.